Have you heard? Have you heard? There's a story about this man. He's done some amazing stuff, and I can't wait to tell people about it. But you're gonna have to wait maybe 40 years. Okay, 50 years. Maybe 100 years. What if someone came up to you with this, it was this awesome story they wanted to share, but they couldn't tell you right there on the spot. Instead, you had to wait not a day, not a week, the next time you see them, not the next time they come in town, but 40 years, 50 years. How do you, what would you think in terms of accuracy? Do you think they would remember all the details if they waited 40, 50, 100 years? Do you think they would remember all the details? Well, we're going to talk about this because there is a book that's out here that people use that same logic and believe that it's actually still very accurate. We're going to talk about that today in this video. Okay, so I'm going to actually have all of this stuff on the screen for you so you can kind of follow along. So yes, so a lot of times we think the Bible was something that was written, you know, it was a few guys that got together and said, we're just going to spend a weekend in the cabin somewhere, and we're going to write down this whole Bible. We just got out of this wonderful experience, and we're going to write it all down before we forget it. Well, that's not what happened at all. And so if you take a look at this timeline here, it shows you exactly when the Bible was written, and it wasn't over a weekend, it wasn't over a year, it was over a period of centuries, really, you know, when you take a look at it. You know, here you have the death of Christ, you know, that was around 33 AD, you know, around that time. However, when you look at it, First Thessalonians, we're not even in the book of Matthew. First Thessalonians was supposedly the first book that was written. That was written in AD 50 or CE 50, Common Era 50. So that was actually the first book. This is years after death, burial, the alleged death, burial, and resurrection. We don't get to Mark, because Mark is actually the first book. We don't get to Mark until close to 70 CE or AD. We don't even get to Mark until then. Matthew is close to 80. You see what I'm saying? You see how this is playing out? So take the time, look at this timeline, and you can see for yourself, you know, when these things were written. So the basic question is this: if you just got out of this wonderful experience of a lifetime, of lifetimes, but yet the people who experienced it wait 10, 20, 40, 50, beyond years to write it down, that should start bringing up some questions when it comes to accuracy. But it's not just accuracy. Now it opens the door for other agendas and everything else. And that's what we're going to be getting into a little bit more here. Now, the next thing we're going to get into, we're going to talk about how Buddhism and the Bible, the relationship between the two. This is something I've heard people say a long time, and I used to just brush this off when I was in Christendom. I'm like, yeah, they just trying to hook everything in there. But when you actually take the time and look at the history, I tell you, it's going to bring up more questions than anything else. And so I'm gonna find somewhere else so we can sit down, and then we're going to talk about it. Now, before we continue, I want to make something perfectly clear, because I know I have people, you know, if it don't apply to you, then it doesn't apply to you. But trust me, and some of y'all have seen it even in the comment section, people will hear just enough to get either offended or to make these sweeping assumptions. I am not telling people to go into Buddhism. I'm not telling people to worship any other gods. This is simply a historical overview, if you will, and we're just looking at the facts, and that's it. We're not concluding that you have to go and worship anything or anybody or any deity at all. Okay, so let's just make that perfectly clear. What you decide to do with your life, that's up to you. Okay, but we are not endorsing any of that. I got to say that very clearly. Okay, so now let's start kind of making our way into this. So the first thing I want to bring out is I want you to pay attention to everything that we're talking about. I want you to pay close attention to these timelines, okay? The timelines are going to be very key, because you're going to notice that all of these things are happening all around the same time, you know? So first and foremost, this belief that somehow the Bible, as we know it, was written thousands and thousands of years ago, and they kind of kept it all in this, tucked away in their scroll or whatever. That's not true at all. What we know today as the Bible wasn't actually constructed until you get into the first century, third century BCE, before the Common Era, and around first, second, third, and then it goes on to AD, or the Common Era. It goes on to there, but there's no evidence that a complete Bible, you know, let's exclude the New Testament, right, was not written or compiled until we get into this era where Greece was actually running things. So that's something I want you to definitely keep in mind there, okay? Because that's all facts. Another thing, just as a side note, and I'm just going to throw this out here, and this is something I'll do a video on later, is that I was listening to some scholars, and they were talking about how there's no record of, you know how in the book of Deuteronomy, you know, when they go through all of these different, the laws, the practices, the dietary laws and stuff like that. Well, under the umbrella of Judaism, you will not find any solid concrete record of all those laws actually being practiced together under the umbrella of Judaism until you start getting to around first century, you know, BCE, and then going on into, well, no, actually third century BCE, sorry about that, until you start getting into first century AD or CE and going forward from there. But prior to that, there's no concrete evidence of a group of people who are actually carrying all of these, what we call the law, statutes, and commandments, all under this umbrella called Judaism. You don't see that at all. There's no evidence of that. And so if you have evidence or proof of that, put it in the comment section. But I'm listening to people who have studied this stuff for many, many years, and they're showing many, many receipts, and that ain't one of them. Okay, so just to be clear with that, that's something else. Now, the oldest copy of the Bible, or what we call the Bible today, that they have, they refer to it as the Codex Sinaiticus. Sinaiticus. I hope I'm saying that right. We actually talked about this before. And they said this is referred to as the oldest Bible. And trying to find where they said, and guess where they found it? In Egypt. They found it in Egypt. And again, a lot of the keys, and who was running Egypt at this time? It was the Greeks, okay? And so this book was actually found, again, around that same time period here. I'll put it on the screen. I don't have it here, the exact year that they're dating. They're saying it goes back like 1,200 years. I'm trying to find it where it's on here, but I'll put it on the screen there. Okay, so that's that. All right, so now let's get into this other part that I was talking about when it comes to the connection between Buddhism and Buddhism and the Bible, okay, and the connection between the two. So I'm going to be reading, I'll have this on the screen as well. I'm going to be reading from this article. It's a really good page. It's called Ancient Origins. You can check it out, and they have a lot of scholarly work on there that you can reference, and you can go and search on your own. Take the time to go through it. They have plenty of footnotes, so if you have any questions about anything, you can always go and check the footnotes for yourself and do additional research. Okay, so don't just go by the article, but also you can go take the time and look at the footnotes as well, so that you can go and prove this stuff out. Okay, so I'm going to read most of this article, but I'm going to read enough just so that you can get a general idea. The link will be in the description below so that you can check it out on your own time. Okay, all right, so let me just point this out. So I'm just going to skip the first paragraph, and we're going to jump down to the second one. They said, but despite the differences, there exists an uncanny similarity in how an underlying mythology shaped the stories of the founders of these two world religions, talking about Buddhism and Christianity. We can't help but wonder if the writers shaped their origin story to fit a mythological pattern of some kind. The principal texts of both religions were written down only after decades. That's an ad, y'all. Ain't nobody sending me money. Sorry about that. There's some offer up ad. I hate when they do that. But anyway, the principal texts of both religions were written down only after decades, and in some cases centuries had passed since the founder's death, leaving plenty of time to organize oral tradition into familiar and acceptable frameworks. How else can we explain such an uncanny similarity? So both in Judaism, Judaism, and when we get to, or Christianity and Buddhism, their principal texts were not written until like centuries later. So when you want to talk about accuracy, see, the key for you and I should be, if we're going to base our lives on something, it needs to be based on facts and accuracy, not just assumptions. This is very key. A lot of people want to dance around that, but no, if you're going to build your life, your family on something, you better make sure it's accurate to the best of your ability. All right, so let's go on. But what we're finding out is that the Bible is not, from a historical standpoint, is not. And also they're talking about Buddhism as well. But let's go ahead and continue. They said both left home and faced down evil. And this is talking about Jesus and the person that they refer to as the Buddha. Now, I may not get these names right, so please give me some grace here. So both, they said Siddhartha Gautama, who was to become the Buddha, and Jesus of Nazareth, who was to become the Christ, are said to have left their homes in the prime of their lives, seeking truths that exist beyond the scope of most people's interests. Both were eventually led into a wilderness where, alone, they faced the devil and his traditional three temptations. So, just like Jesus faced three temptations in the wilderness, so did the Buddha. Now, remember I said, keep in mind the time frame that these things were all taking place. They were all taking place around the same time in terms of the documenting and they're saying when this stuff took place. It all took place around the same time. Let's see. Siddhartha, and again, I hope I'm saying that right. Siddhartha sat between the bo tree where Mara, an old Hindu god, and the devil figure confronted him. All right. Jesus in the wilderness faced Satan, the fallen angel formerly known as Lucifer. It's believed that both were tempted by the cravings of the flesh, the spirit, and worldly pride. Both emerged from that experience with the new teaching and immediately proclaimed their insights. The Buddha's first order of business was to deliver the famous Deer Park Discourse. Interesting, Deer Park. Don't they make water too? Anyway, the Deer Park Discourse. Here, he put forth the teaching that was to become the bedrock of Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths. Let's continue. Jesus preached what had become known as the Sermon on the Mount, wherein he outlined the Beatitudes, a model for Christian life. Both sermons detailed in systematic fashion how followers were to live out their precepts of the founder. Let's continue. It said both selected a group of 12 disciples. Okay, I mean, come on, man. 12 disciples, one of whom was to later become a betrayer. I mean, come on. Although the Buddha lived on into old life, both men eventually died at the hands of another man who they each forgave before succumbing to death. Even the final words of the Buddha are echoed by the proclamations of Christianity. The Buddha said, pay attention. Be ye lamps unto yourselves. Jesus said almost the same thing. Ye are the light of the world. The Buddha declared all matter in this world to be transitory. Jesus said, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. I hope you're catching these similarities. The Buddha's last words are said to be, work out your own salvation with diligence. Did you hear that? The Buddha's last words was, work out your own salvation with diligence. Okay, I mean, come on, man. The Apostle Paul, speaking for Jesus, said, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Anyway, let's continue. Okay, both founders had priesthoods and symbolic postures. Now, this one is also an interesting one. Hopefully, I can edit this in the video so you can see the comparisons. The traditions that follow both men are equally interesting. Both developed a system of priesthood complete with rules and regulations for men who ascended to positions of leadership. Buddhism soon split into two different factions. The oldest, Theravada, venerated the living Buddha with statues traditionally cast into one of three different positions. The well-known lotus or seated position represents the founder in his enlightenment, the position of meditation. The standing position represents Buddha, the teacher. The reclining position pictures Buddha entering nirvana. All right. So those are the three positions that you'll see the Buddha in when he's portrayed. All right. The tradition parallels that of traditional Catholic Church, which traces its ancestry back to the founder, Jesus. He too is often pictured in three traditional postures. Sometimes he is praying either alone or in the desert or off in the mountains. Sometimes artistic renderings portray him teaching in multitudes. Other renditions show him ascending into heaven. Both Theravada and the Catholic Church thus place a great deal of artistic emphasis on their founders' private spiritual lives, public teaching, and eventual journey into nirvana or heaven. All right. Both belief systems broke apart. But just as the Protestant reformers broke away from the Catholic Church, forming denominations that differ from one another in matters of tradition and theology, Mahayana Buddhism broke off from the Theravada and formed new offshoots, among them Tantric Buddhism, Zen, Pure Land, and Nichiren. Although these are not called denominations, they formed in the same way many Protestant denominations did. Someone had a new insight, a new way of living out of tradition, and others followed. So it's just like Christianity. It broke off into all of these different splinter groups. More alike than different. To this day, both Buddhism and Christianity have a multitude of followers, each living out the tenets of their founders with great zeal, while often declaring their particular interpretation to be, if not the only way, then certainly the best and most authentic tradition. But given the similarities of the origin stories of the two world religions, one almost has to wonder if a hidden mythology is lurking unseen in the background, a central mythology that has shaped Buddhism and Christianity into a great forces they are today. All right. So yeah, check out that article when you get a chance, and there's some, he has some sources in there you can check out on your own time. All right. Another thing I want you to keep in mind too, when you're looking at the history of Buddhism, remember, the whole time I said just pay attention to these timelines here. There was a such thing called Greco-Buddhism. All right, it's called Greco-Buddhism. This took place between 4th century BC and 5th century AD. Again, we're in the same time frame as between the time frame of what is said that Jesus was born and did his ministry and died and resurrected. The same time frame that they're saying that the Bible was written around that same time. And now you got Buddhism, well, what they refer to as Greco-Buddhism, all taking place all at the same time. I mean, come on, y'all. you know. So again, there's a such thing called Greco-Buddhism, and I would encourage you to look that up. Now, among the things I can mention in here, because there's a lot in this Wikipedia, and I would encourage you to look at it, but I'll point out a couple of things. One of the things that's mentioned here is that Buddhism in of itself was something that wasn't really heavy on imagery or statues. They more were it were heavy on the precepts or the sayings of the Buddha, you know. They weren't really heavy in the statues. However, there was one group of people that was very heavy in it. That was the Greeks. Sorry, I had to interject in here real quick here. Basically, my camera overheated and I must have lost a file there, but whatever. But anyway, what I was trying to say in that little clip is this, is that the Greeks are the ones that are credited in really bringing statues into the Buddhism space. Buddhism prior to that, it was really known, the followers were really known for not necessarily making statues and bowing down and worshiping the statues, even though they may have had that, but it was more about, here are the precepts, here are the sayings of the Buddha, and we want to follow and emulate that. But it was the Greeks that actually introduced this whole concept of building all of these, everything is a statue. I mean, they really brought it up into them, you know, made it into a big thing. Again, let me be clear. I'm not saying you didn't have statues prior to the Greeks. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the Greeks are the ones that really made it into a big deal. You know what I'm saying? Just like they did with Christianity, the same thing. Just like they did with their leadership. They made statues out of everything. Well, it was no different when it came to religion. They wanted to make statues out of everybody that was portrayed in these quote unquote holy books. And so that was the point I was making there. So when it came to Buddhism, even though people who were following that track may have had statues, it was the Greeks that really brought it into making it a big thing, where it was a lot of statues of the Buddha all over the place and all that. The Greeks really are credited of doing that. So that was the point I was trying to make there. So again, I think that's it. I'm trying to think, I think I lost something else here, but that's about it, family. Thank you so much for tuning in this video. You guys take care, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you.